Welcome to Soul Signal, a deep dive where we explore the mysteries of spiritual awakening and the journey within. Together we'll navigate the depths of consciousness, uncover ancient wisdom, and discover the signals your soul is sending you. Let's dive deep.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about something you've probably heard a lot about lately, a really personal journey that more and more people are going on. We're talking about faith deconstruction. It's this whole process that gets right to the heart of identity, what you believe, and even how you see the world around you. So, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the basics, what deconstruction even is. Then we'll dig into the big questions, the intellectual and the moral ones that get the ball rolling. After that, we'll look at what happens next, what gets rebuilt. And finally, we'll wrap up with the big picture question about the whole journey. Okay, let's just jump right in. Part 1. What are we even talking about when we say deconstruction? The first thing to get is that it's not just about, throwing everything out. It's a process of rethinking, of taking a really close look at the beliefs you've always held. Yeah, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean? For the person who's actually in it, this is so much more than just a thought experiment. It's super personal. It's like putting the very foundation of your faith under a microscope. So at its heart, it's really all about questioning. The artist who goes by Naked Pastor puts it this way. It's the erosion of beliefs you inherited. It's like, imagine taking apart an engine that's been running your whole life. You're looking at every single part, questioning all the religious conditioning you just accepted without a second thought. And this is where it gets really, really deep. As writer Kay Malone says, it's not just about ideas. It's about identity. Think about it. If your faith is who you are, then questioning that faith, well, it means you're questioning the very core of your personal identity. The stakes are incredibly high. All right, so let's get into the next part. Where does this all start? For a lot of people, it doesn't begin with some big, dramatic crisis. It's much quieter. It's an intellectual journey that starts with these little cracks in the foundation. A lot of times, that first little crack shows up when someone just starts reading the Bible for themselves, maybe with new eyes. You come across passages that seem to say two completely different things. Like one verse saying an eye for an eye, and another saying turn the other cheek. And you're left thinking, wait a minute, which one is it? How do these fit together? Now, what's really interesting is that scholars have been digging into these tensions for ages. They have all these methods, source criticism, literary analysis, you name it. They don't see them as mistakes, but more like clues. Clues that point to a really complex history with different sources and traditions all woven together. But for someone who is taught the Bible is simple and without error, finding out about all this complexity can be absolutely mind-blowing. And the questions don't stop with the text. They start to look outward. Author Derek Day brings this up. He talks about the archaeological record. When you go looking for hard physical evidence for some of these huge biblical events, like the Exodus from Egypt or the walls of Jericho tumbling down, well, the evidence just isn't there in the way you'd expect. And when your faith is built on these events being historical fact, that silence can be pretty loud. Let's take Rhett McLaughlin. You might know him from Good Mythical Morning. For him, the first domino was science. This guy was a professional Christian missionary. He'd been taught his entire life that evolution was just plain wrong. But then he reads a book by a Christian scientist, Francis Collins, and becomes convinced evolution is real. And his wife? She knew right away. She knew this wasn't just about science. It was a huge seismic shift. And see, that's the key. The real turning point for him wasn't just accepting evolution. It was the realization that the people he trusted, the authorities who were so sure about this one thing, were completely wrong. And that opens up a massive question, right? If they were wrong about something so fundamental, what else could they be wrong about? Can you trust anything else they say? But it's not always just about the intellect, about facts and history. A lot of the time, the journey goes straight to the heart. It becomes a moral and emotional challenge, a real crisis of conscience. For so many people, a huge trigger is this feeling of a disconnect. They hear about love and grace and humility from the stage, but then they look at the actions of the church or its leaders, and they see something else entirely. And when that gap between what's preached and what's practiced gets too big to ignore, that's when a crisis can really hit. And sometimes the moral questions dig right into the core beliefs. YouTuber Jezebel Vibes has this really powerful analogy. She says, what if on your wedding day, your husband said, I love you, and you have to love me back, or else I'm going to throw you into a burning pit? That's not love. That's coercion. And she uses that to ask a really tough question about the concept of hell. Is a love that comes with that kind of threat really love at all? Then there's the political angle, which Derek Tay talks about. People see their faith getting tangled up with politics, being used to push certain policies or to stir up nationalism or to fight against social change. And when you see your faith being, well, weaponized like that, it can feel like a deep betrayal. Like the whole point, the compassion, the love, has just been totally lost. So, okay, the old framework starts to crumble. What happens then? What comes next? Well, after deconstruction often comes reconstruction. And it can be a really tough process, but also a really profound one. Learning to rebuild and see the world in a completely new light. One thing you hear over and over again from people who've been through this is how their whole perspective shifts. They talk about leaving a world that was very black and white. You know, this is good, that is evil, this is right, that is wrong. And they step into a world that's just full of nuance and complexity. As Jezebel Vibes puts it, the world just becomes so much more colorful. And a massive part of that rebuilding is getting comfortable with not having all the answers. Think about it. In a lot of religious systems, having certainty is everything. So to be able to just step back and say, you know what, I don't know, that's not failure. It's actually incredibly freeing. It's a huge deal. And here's something really fascinating. This new path often leads to a deeper, maybe different kind of compassion. Jezebel Vibes talks about how she was always taught that looking inward was selfish. But now that self-reflection is the very thing that helps her feel empathy for others. It's like by learning to give herself grace, she suddenly had so much more grace to give to everyone else. And if you had to boil down the whole reconstruction process to one key thing, it's probably this. It's a single, massive shift. Remember Case Maloney? She says it's this move from looking outside of yourself for a savior, for all the answers, to turning inward. It's about finding your own sense of empowerment and autonomy right inside yourself. Okay, so this all brings us to our last section, the final question that hangs over this whole deeply human journey. At the end of the day, what deconstruction really does is it changes the entire definition of faith. It stops being this fixed destination, right? Like a place you arrive at with a neat little checklist of beliefs. Instead, belief itself becomes the journey. A constant process of asking questions, of learning, of growing. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the destination is the journey.
Thank you for diving deep with us today on Soul Signal. Remember, your spiritual journey is uniquely yours. Trust the signals, honor the process, and keep exploring the infinite wisdom within you. Until next time, stay connected to your soul's frequency and join Big Dan on TikTok for more.